start to texture and to lay out your photo material and get that diffuse texture going, you really should be connecting that PSD up to your MIA material and just to check it as you go. So we connect and apply texture maps to a shader by using this little, if you look over here, we have a little checkerboard box. This allows you to connect a lot of things to a channel. So if we click on this, you can see we have a lot of options to connect to our diffuse color. Now we want to connect a file up here. It's not a good idea to use the PSD file down here. This is the file it kind of wants if we're using PSDs, but it does weird things to the color management. So we're just going to use file for the moment. File is what you're going to use normally. We're just connecting the Photoshop file at the moment just for our preview purposes. When we apply our final map, we really want it to be another kind of map, another kind of texture. I highly recommend you use .png files. That will give you smaller files but without any kind of artifacting. You can also use .tga or .tiff files. Those three formats, Maya really quite likes to view them. So if you start using JPEGs, it gets a bit weird. So I highly recommend you use PNG. But for the moment, just for preview purposes, we're going to attach a PSD, our Photoshop file. So you can see here I've chosen a file, and it's now connected to our banana material. And if we look in our scene here, we can see that we have our Photoshop file. If we switch back to Photoshop, you can see how it correlates. Oh, got a bit of a green mark there. So you're going to need to do this to check your seams, make sure you're kind of working correctly. Obviously we don't really want the UV to be on the final thing, but it's fine for the moment. So we can check, you can see it's all working. Now if you Photoshop, when you save off a Photoshop file, Maya should automatically pick up that it's changed and update your scene. So if we change this, if we invert something, and we save it, we jump back to Maya, it will eventually update. Might take a little while to figure it out, but we should see a change. Is it going to do it? It will do it as soon as I do something. There we go. Now if it doesn't, you can manually go in and update it from that file node, but you can see it kind of generally does it, especially if you jump into your material, your Hypershade. Now when you're viewing and working in Maya, I highly recommend you turn off your lighting or just have it as flat shaded. If we turn on the lights, you can see here, it makes it very hard to tell what's going on, what you need to texture, and you basically there's too much information. So if we go to lighting, use flat lighting, we can just see our textures nice and flat, completely flat shaded. Now let's jump back to Photoshop. So if we just click over that, now imagine we've jumped forward and now we have a full diffuse map here. So we've fully painted it out, it looks okay. It's not amazing for this one, but it's pretty good. If you look on my map here, I've kind of made everything into folders, which is kind of useful here. So we're at a point now where the diffuse looks pretty good. If we jump back into here and we apply that map, you can see I have a banana diffuse.png. So we're not attaching the PNG, we're not attaching the Photoshop file, we've saved off a PNG of that layer. So than that. If we look at our banana, you can see we have a fully textured banana. This diffuse is just about right. So that's ready to go. Now, it's important that you've got it exactly how you want, because at this point any changes you make to your diffuse map are going to have to match your reflection map and your bump map. So this has to be right. If you end up changing it down the track, you're going to have to change the other files. And this is why you can see here I have all these in a single Photoshop file. So if I change the diffuse, I can kind of jump in and I can edit the bump map, the reflection map, much more easily than if they were separate Photoshop files. It's a good way to work, and it's easy to save these out as individuals. So, as I mentioned, if you have a really good diffuse map, to make we're going to make the bump map next. To generate a bump map of this should be pretty easy. The first thing we're going to do is we can duplicate this whole folder. So this folder, you can see I have a sticker, I have a bunch of stuff here, there's separate layers. Doesn't really matter that they are, but I'm going to duplicate that whole thing. I'm going to call this bump. So this is exactly the same as the diffuse, and I'm going to just compress down all these layers into one using Alt-E. So that's now turned that into a single layer, but I still have my sticker. This just makes it much easier to kind of edit as we go along. Now my sticker, bump maps. Bump maps are maps that will affect your surface to either raise them or lower them, and you can obviously do that via a texture. Bump maps are from black to white, so they only use black and white, and black is the lowest the surface can be, and white is the highest, and grey is mid-grey is the exact in the middle. I have some examples to show you here. Here's an example of a bump map. So you can see high will be the highest because it's white, low will be the lowest because it's black, and grey is the mid-scale. So I've applied that to the banana as an example. So you can see here that where the H is, the high, it's kind of risen out of the surface, whereas the low, the exclamation mark, is sunk in. And that's basically it. So if we can easily apply that to our model, and we can convert our diffuse map to be a bump map quite easily. So first thing we want to do, we know our sticker is probably going to be raised off the surface, so we're going to make our sticker not quite white, maybe a little bit off-white. We can just paint that, actually just convert it like that. That's why I've kept the sticker separate from the rest of it. Simple dimple. Now for the banana, we want to convert, the best way to do this is to convert your image using adjustments to black and white. Down here, adjustments, black and white, image adjustments, black and white. And this allows us to alter this, how it converts the color information to be black and white. And you can see on our banana, those little black dots are going to sink in. They're going to drop down, and anything black is going to be low, and anything white is going to be high. So we can go through here and adjust to get the best separation between the two. Now we obviously don't want that green to be a bump, because that's just a surface color, so we might have to paint a bit of that out. So we can kind of adjust these till we've got roughly what we want. Have to paint that out. So that's starting to look pretty good. Yep, that'll do. Okay, so that's pretty much a bump map. I mean, this is going to come out pretty bad, so we're going to have to jump in and edit it. So the first thing I'd probably do is paint using our lighten and paint out this green to be not quite so bad there. And also these here, we can probably paint them out. Actually, well, we want a bit more information here. Our material has a bit of information in there. Might leave that there because that'll give us a bit of interesting bump. And quickly just paint out that stuff there. And I might just darken. I've got a little bit of white. You can see the values are a little bit white there, so we can darken that off a bit. Even all the paint out. So that's a good bump map that we can test. Now, bump maps are very sensitive and they do take a little bit of tweakage. Now, the best thing to do is to be subtle. If your bump map is too aggressive, it'll look really fake, and it's better to err on the side of caution than not. So we can save that out. Save that as PNG bump. Don't want to place that, go and bump it to. So if we jump back into Photoshop, into Maya, materials. Now right down at the bottom of our MIA material is a bump, and we have an overall bump. Oops, an overall bump here that we can apply. I have one already connected up, but it's the same thing here. We just, if I break that connection, I do it again. There's overall bump, there's standard bump. I've been using overall bump, seems to be fine. So we connect it again, we're just connecting a file. The difference is here, you'll see in our node editor, it's added another little link in between the file. So we've got our base 2D texture, we have our file, and then there's a bump 2D node. Now this just allows us to adjust the bump level within Maya easily, and also either use a normal map or a bump map using bumps here. So we go to our file node, we attach our texture to it, so bump02. That's all now connected up, so we could happily render that to see the result. Now if I go to our bump, you can see the bump value in yellow says it's connected, so we can't really adjust that because that's connected to our texture, but this bump depth we can. So this is the value. If we set it to 0, there'll be no bumps. 1 is exactly the values of the texture. You can also take that much higher or much lower. But in general, I'd say go 0.5 and test. So if we render our banana and see what happens. Right, now you can see with that bump map that we've made that it's actually quite aggressively bumpy. If we jump back to Photoshop, even though that it's not white and it's not black, we have a kind of a light grey and a kind of a mid-grey, the difference is still great enough for us to get this really pockmarked surface. So that's why it's really important in Maya to adjust this bump depth. So this might, for our banana, because it's quite subtle, this might go down to like 0.2 or even 0.15. So we'd test that through rendering, doing little test renders to see what value is just right. And basically we've now got a good bumpy surface for our banana. And the last step now is to do the reflection map. Now the reflection map, again, a bit like a bump map, is black and white. So if we look at our reflectivity slider up here in our reflection area, we can see the slider goes from 0 to 1. So 0 being it's not reflective and 1 being fully reflective. So if we have a black and white texture, we can drive that value. Now I had this at about 394 or something. This is a good value to keep an eye on because this is the surface that we kind of wanted in terms of how reflective it is. So that 0.39 is going to be a value that we can kind of match in our texture. So if we go back to our bump map, we can actually just edit our bump map and convert that into a reflection map. So again, we can duplicate our bump map. Let's call it reflect, if I can spell properly. There we go. So again, if we look at here, white's going to be reflective, the most reflective, and black is going to be not reflective. Now we don't want, obviously, the ends of our banana to be that reflective, and these little dimples are probably not actually going to be reflective either. But our banana sticker is actually going to be highly reflective because it's a different surface. So what we have here is pretty almost just about right. We might want to paint bits of it to be less reflective than others, and I know that our kind of banana ends over here are definitely less reflective, so we can just paint very carefully. And obviously this is just a rough example. We could probably paint this to be, let's just do that as a multiply brush. I'm using a mouse here, so it's a little bit hard. I highly recommend you use a Wacom tablet. So we can kind of, oops, turn on UVs to see what we're doing. We can now brush these areas to be less reflective. You can be kind of pretty rough with your reflection map. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's useful to have a bit of that information, these little bits and bobs coming from your diffuse map to give it a bit of sense of correctness. But overall, you know, you can be a little, it's not quite as sensitive as the bump map. So that looks pretty fine to me, I think. So if I get my eyedropper, go to my info, we can kind of see that this is a light grey, so we actually want this overall image to be much darker. Remember, this overall grey here needs to be almost 40% grey. Now this is much higher, this is about 80% grey. So we can go to image adjustments and go to levels or curves. I like to use curves, and we can just drag this down. So this gives us, you can see a histogram of what's in the image, the kind of the pixel count of different colors. We can adjust the brightness and darkness by using it, by using adjusting the curve. So we want to drop the whole lot down to be much darker. So we're probably looking at about there. Probably about right. Yeah, that's about right. So you can do it by eye. Again, you can save this off and do a test on it. So we're going to save this as PNG banana reflective. Call this banana reflective 02. Again, it's a PNG. So we jump back into Maya. Now there's a trick here to connect it up. Now reflection map and also the gloss maps, they're actually going to look for the alpha channel. So if you directly connect the color, so if we were to go over here on our reflectivity, if we were to select this and connect the file, you'll see this little connector is connecting the alpha channel. So it's not connecting the color, it's connecting the alpha. So we need to break this and reconnect it to fix it. But first of all, we'll attach our image. So we have banana reflective 02. There's our texture. So we can apply that. And we want to disconnect the alpha channel because we don't actually have an alpha channel. Alpha channel means it is the whether it's transparent or not in the texture. So we want to delete that connection, and we need to change the out color. So if we click on this little plus here, we want to just select one channel. So you can see we can connect the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel, and we just want to choose one of those. Because it's black and white, they're all kind of the same. So we can connect this R, and we can drag it and connect it to the reflectivity. And that will now correctly render your reflectivity. If you don't do it, you just do the out color, it will just ignore the texture. And this will correctly do it. So if we now jump back and do a render, we can see the result. Right, now you can see the render with the reflectivity. It's a little bit subtle, but you can now see the banana is definitely looking a little bit more like a proper banana surface. I've reduced down that bump back to, I think I did set it at 0.15, so you can see it's definitely less popped. I could probably paint out a little bit of this area around here. But overall now, with that combination of the reflection map and the diffuse map and the bump map all working together, we have a fairly convincing looking banana. And this leaves us at the end of our tutorial. And if we can go back to banana image, we have something that is pretty good. Now, like I say, this isn't the greatest banana in the world, and my reflection map is actually terrible, and I should go back and redo it. The one I've just did now is much better. But relatively quickly, like I mentioned, from modeling to texturing this, I did this in half a day, including all the render time. So it is quite possible to do something quite quickly, and if you have really good UVs and you start to understand the connection between the UVs and how you're going to texture the object, you can work relatively fast into high quality. Obviously, the banana is a organic shape, so it's actually much harder to unwrap. Things like that table you can see below. This is a reference from my table at home. Took me about 15 minutes to generate the texture, repeating texture, and the required maps to get it to be right. And it actually looks much better than the banana in terms of being truthful to the surface I was trying to match. So this leaves us to kind of say really that you can now head off and do textures. Photoshop is going to be troublesome for those who haven't used Photoshop before. I worked very quickly and I used a lot of hotkeys. Your tutors are there to help you with that and to kind of guide you through that. They will hopefully have seen this before you do, so they can help you out. The trick here is to stay subtle, keep your references as reference, as in reduce the amount you paint, and always use that material you have. And the last thing is always check your reference. This whole project has been about making sure you have the object that you can look and see and check, and always compare it with the object in your render that you're making, and understand how you can change it. So good luck, all the best, and look forward to seeing your final work.